Hello, and welcome to our second week on the theme of mental health for Awakened. You know, when we read through the Bible, it can be a little weird to see all of these stories about exorcisms, or at least when I read through the Bible and I read about exorcisms, it's odd for me because the first thing I think about is the movie The Exorcist and the head spinning around and projectile vomiting and ew. I don't think, though, that's what the Bible actually has in mind whenever we read about exorcisms. We've got to remember that we're reading about a pre-scientific time where people tried to make sense of the world in which they lived based on the understandings that they had. So whenever there were people who had physical or mental health concerns, a lot of times the explanation given for that was, well, maybe they did something wrong, or maybe they were possessed by a demon. And unfortunately, even though we know better now, some of that language has continued in the church. And I don't think that's actually what's happening. People aren't made sick because of the way that they behave in the world, and it's not because they've been possessed by a demon. It's just the realities of living. That if you are alive, sometimes you get sick, sometimes you get really sick. Sometimes you emotionally feel really good, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes we have mental health issues that affect our lives, and it's not a result of anything that we have or haven't done. It is just the reality of life. And so I think that whenever we read through these stories, we ought to see how Jesus is portrayed as acting towards those who are suffering, because as Jesus followers, we ought to be inspired by the way that he acted. And whenever we read these stories about people being possessed by demons, the way that Jesus always responded to that was by helping the people who were struggling. And as Jesus followers, we ought to hear that as our call as well, that we ought to help people who are struggling. That when we are struggling, we ought to seek out help and be met with the resources that we need, because we are all in this life together. So I think regardless of whether you think that Jesus literally healed or literally exorcised demons, or you don't, the response is still the same, that Jesus, whenever he met someone who was suffering, he helped them. And so our call is to help each other. And that's certainly true on an interpersonal level, but it goes beyond that, that we are called to work for systemic change as well. That if we really want to help people, if we really want to help ourselves, if we really want to live in a healthier world, then we have to make it so that resources are available to people in need. We have to work for systemic change. We have to work on legislation that improves access to mental health services. And it is only through that kind of action that real lasting change is available. You know, I think it can be easy in our time to focus on that which is negative. I did my doctoral research on social media, and I love social media. But one of the things that I discovered was that the more you used social media, the more depressed and the lonelier you felt. It's called perceived social isolation, that you felt more isolated, which is really weird because social media is all about connecting us. But it led to feelings of loneliness. And I think that's because people aren't necessarily interacting and taking care of each other. That we might be interacting, but anonymously. We're not building true connection, true community all the time when we're on social media. And so we also are always comparing ourselves to other people. And it can be tough to focus on that which we have in our lives right now and that which is good. Because if we focus on what we have to be thankful for, and I recognize that we are all coming from different places, that we all have different struggles, and that life is really tough for some of us, but if we focus on that which we have to be thankful for, it can recenter us. It's a mindfulness practice. One of the things that I do is I keep a gratitude journal on my phone. I'm not very good with paper and pencil or anything like that. I'm not very good at journaling, but I do always have my phone with me. And so whenever something happens that I am grateful for, I just take a moment and I write it down in an app on my phone. I write it down so that I can remember it. And whenever I am feeling a little down, I look at that gratitude journal that I have created in an app on my phone, and I look at all the good things that are going on in my life. And I take just a moment to focus on those good things and to give thanks for those things. And depending on what your spiritual practice is, it could be sitting down and actually bowing your head and praying, giving thanks. It could be just sitting there for a moment and appreciating that there are good things going on in your life. So this week, the spiritual practice that I encourage you to engage in is to take notice of the positive things that are going on in your life. Be mindful about what is good and appreciate those things. And whenever negative feelings start to creep their way into your brain, if that ever happens to you, focus on the good things. Because recentering ourselves like that can help us to get through even the most difficult times. May it be so, and thanks be to God. Amen.